When I see Angel and Demons, I first think it's a novel, but it's...
In the cool twilight of Ouagadougou, where the evening air carried the dust of the day and the murmurs of markets slowly fading into silence, President Ibrahim Traoré sat in quiet reflection inside the modest study of the presidential residence. The walls were lined not with gold or marble, but with books, military maps, and handwritten notes of vision. He had grown used to silence in moments like these, though his mind never rested. He thought of his people, of the struggles against exploitation, of the endless speeches he gave about sovereignty and dignity. Yet that night, his thoughts strayed towards something deeper, something invisible, like the wind that swept over Sahel. It was then that a visitor was announced. Charlie Kirk, the American political commentator, had come on what many thought was an unusual visit. There was curiosity about why a figure like him would find himself in Burkina Faso. But Traoré was not surprised. He had learned that those who claimed to defend truth often found one another, regardless of borders. Charlie stepped into the room, his demeanor sharp yet warm, his eyes carrying the fire of conviction. The two men shook hands firmly, each recognizing the strength in the other. After brief exchanges of courtesy, Charlie leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, as though what he was about to share was meant for only one pair of ears in the world. "Ibrahim," Charlie began, "I didn't come here to talk about politics or strategies or the usual noise. I came here to talk about something that surpasses empires, surpasses nations, even surpasses the rise and fall of civilizations. I came to talk to you about Jesus." Traoré raised an eyebrow. He had heard many missionaries, priests, and politicians invoke that name. Some use it to control, others to inspire, still others to deceive. But something in Charlie's tone was different. Less about conquest and more about revelation. "Jesus?" Ibrahim asked, cautious but curious. "You think I don't know him? I grew up hearing of him. Our people know of the church, the cross, the stories. But Christianity, it has always seemed like the faith of those who once colonized us. A cloak for conquest, not liberation." Charlie nodded. "I understand why you think that. Many in the West don't even understand Jesus themselves. They turned his name into a weapon, an institution, a means of power. But the Jesus I came to tell you about is not the Jesus of empire, not the Jesus of colonial churches, not the Jesus painted on European canvases with pale skin and blue eyes. The real Jesus, Ibrahim, is more radical, more liberating, and more dangerous to the powers of this world than most Christians even dared believe." Traoré leaned back, his interest stirred. "Go on." Charlie's words grew like fire in the quiet room. "You see, they told the world Jesus came to make people religious, that he came so they could build cathedrals, wear robes, chant rituals, and tie to structures of power. But the truth is this: Jesus came to overturn kingdoms, not with armies, not with weapons, but with truth so pure that even emperors trembled. He said the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. He said, blessed are the poor, not the rich. He said the meek, the broken, the oppressed. People like your farmers, your miners, your mothers are the ones who inherit the earth. Do you realize how revolutionary that is?" Traoré's eyes sharpened. He had always sought to defend the downtrodden against exploitation. "That sounds more like justice and religion," he said quietly. Charlie smiled. "Exactly. The real Jesus was never about religion. He was about truth. He looked into the eyes of corrupt judges, hypocritical priests, and imperial governors, and he told them they had no authority except what his Father allowed. And for that, they killed him. They didn't kill him because he was gentle or because he healed the sick. They killed him because he challenged the entire system of lies on which their world was built. Religion without truth is slavery, and Jesus came to shatter that slavery." The word struck Traoré like thunder. He had seen leaders betray their own people for gold, for foreign masters, for prestige. He had seen religious men bless the exploitation of his land. But here was a different picture. Jesus not as a tool of the oppressor, but as the greatest liberator. Charlie continued, his voice rising with conviction. "Do you know what else they don't tell you? They don't tell you that Jesus was not European. He was not a figure of white marble statues. He was a Middle Eastern man, closer to the skin of your people than to those who claim to own his story. He walked dusty roads, ate with fishermen, spoke to women no one respected, touched lepers everyone rejected. His kingdom was not made of palaces, but the poor who believed in him. And he promised something no empire could give: freedom that begins in the soul and spreads into every part of life. Traoré exhaled slowly, almost whispering to himself, "Freedom that begins in the soul." "Yes," Charlie said. "Think of it this way. You fight for sovereignty of your nation, but Jesus fights for sovereignty of a human soul. The enemy of that sovereignty is not just colonial powers or corrupt governments. It is sin, lies, and fear. When a man is ruled by greed, he can enslave his brother. When he is ruled by fear, he betrays his people. When he is ruled by lies, he becomes a puppet. Jesus came to break those chains, to make men free inside, so that no empire can own them again. That is the kingdom he spoke of." The room grew still. Traoré's heart pounded. He remembered countless moments when he had seen men fold under pressure, betray comrades, sell out their people. Was it not because their souls were enslaved long before their hands signed papers? Charlie's eyes burned. "Do you know what would happen if your people truly understood this Jesus? Not the Jesus in paintings, but the real one? They would realize they are not slaves, not pawns, not victims of history. They would realize they are children of the Most High God, heirs to a kingdom that cannot be colonized, cannot be bought, cannot be crushed by bullets." And when people believe that, no empire can control them. Traoré felt as though the air itself was vibrating. He had stood against enemies with weapons, with propaganda, with wealth. But here was something deeper, a kind of weapon that did not kill, but awakened. Charlie lowered his voice again. "Ibrahim, Christianity, as most people know it, has been corrupted. They made it into institutions, rules, divisions. But the truth of Jesus is a revolution of love, justice, and freedom. If Africa ever embraces that truth, not the religion of colonizers, but the living Christ, it will shake the entire world order." The weight of the word sank deep into Traoré's chest. He had always believed Africa must rise through courage, unity, and truth. But now, he wondered if the missing piece was not ideology or politics, but a deeper awakening of the soul, something beyond fear and manipulation. For hours, the two men spoke about the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus blessed the broken and condemned the proud, about the temple, where he overturned the tables of corrupt merchants, about his trial, where he refused to bow to worldly power. Each story unveiled a Jesus not a submission to empire, but defiance against injustice through a higher authority. Finally, silence returned. The night outside had grown deep. The stars spread across the African sky. Traoré sat back. The night after Charlie Kirk's departure, Ibrahim Traoré could not sleep. The words about Jesus kept echoing inside him, louder than the hum of the ceiling fan, louder than the distant sound of motorcycles on the streets of Ouagadougou. For years, he had thought of power as something external, something tied to weapons, alliances, wealth, or willpower. But Charlie had introduced him to another kind of power, one hidden inside the soul, a sovereignty that no foreign hand could ever seize. He rose before dawn and walked through the corridors of the residence. The guard saluted him, but he hardly noticed. His mind was in turmoil. He stepped outside, into the cool air, and looked at the horizon as the first line of light broke through. Birds stirred in the trees, and the city was waking up. He whispered to himself, "If this is true, then everything must be rethought." That morning, Traoré called for no meetings, no briefings. He asked instead for silence. He entered his office, closed the door, and took out an old Bible that had sat on a shelf, more a symbol than a book he had ever read seriously. The leather was worn, its edges frayed. He opened it at random, and his eyes fell on words he had never noticed with such intensity. "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The word struck him like a lightning bolt. Freedom, the very thing he fought for in politics, was written here, not as a slogan, but as a divine promise. Could it be that the liberation of nations began with the liberation of souls? All day he read. He read about Moses confronting Pharaoh, David standing before Goliath, prophets who condemned kings for their corruption. And then he returned to the words of Jesus, the one Charlie had spoken of so passionately. The Sermon on the Mount seemed like a manifesto for a new world. Love your enemies, bless the poor, hunger and thirst for righteousness. These were not weak commands. They were the foundations of a revolution that no bullet could silence. By evening, Traoré felt something stirring inside him, something that frightened and exhilarated him. He wondered if Charlie had planted a seed that could never be uprooted. Days passed, and his advisors began to notice a change. The president spoke less of enemies and more of truth. In private meetings, he asked questions no one expected. What does it mean for a nation to be righteous? Can justice survive without truth? Can sovereignty exist without the freedom of the soul? Some thought he was becoming too philosophical, distracted from the practical struggles of governance. But those closest to him sensed he was grappling with something larger than politics, something spiritual. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Traoré invited Charlie again. The American returned, this time greeted not as a visitor, but as a confidant. "I have been reading," Traoré said, his eyes intense. "I see now what you meant. This Jesus you speak was no servant of empire. He was a threat to empire. He spoke with authority that shook even Rome. But tell me this, why is it that so many who claim his name today serve power instead of truth? Why do churches bless corruption? Why do leaders use his cross as a flag for conquest?" Charlie's face grew grave. "Because, Ibrahim, it is easier to build an institution than to carry a cross. It is easier to preach religion than to live truth. From the beginning, people have tried to tame Jesus, to make him safe, to twist his message into something that served their agendas. But the true Jesus can never be owned. He breaks every chain, even the chains of false Christianity." Traoré leaned forward. "Then Christianity as the world knows it is not Christianity at all?" Charlie shook his head. "No, not in its purest form. Real Christianity is not men controlling other men in the name of God. It is men set free to love God and love one another, no matter the cost. It is a revolution of the heart that no empire can counterfeit. That's why Jesus said, 'My kingdom is not of this world.' And yet, his kingdom invades every part of this world, because truth cannot be contained." The words lit something in Traoré's spirit. He realized then that the greatest battle was not just between African and foreign powers, not just between the oppressed and the oppressors. It was between truth and lies, freedom and fear. And Jesus had placed himself at the center of that battle, not as a distant figure, but as a living king. Over the following weeks, Traoré began to weave these reflections into his leadership. He did not declare a new religion, nor did he preach from podiums. But his words began to carry a strange, magnetic weight. He spoke to the youth about courage rooted not in hatred, but in love of truth. He addressed the soldiers about justice that came not from domination, but from service. He told farmers that their dignity was not measured by wealth, but by the fact that they bore the image of God. Some began to whisper that the president was changing. His enemies accused him of becoming too spiritual, as though faith were a weakness. But his supporters felt something new, something deeper than politics. It was as though he was drawing from a well that could not run dry. One night, he gathered a small group of trusted young leaders. The room was dim, lit only by lamps. He looked at them and said, "Do you know what I discovered? The greatest enemy of our people is not poverty, nor foreign powers. It is the lie that we are less than who we truly are. But Jesus has shown me, our people are children of God, and no empire can change that. If we understand this, we will rise with a power the world cannot explain." The young men and women sat in silence, their hearts pounding. Some felt tears on their cheeks. They had followed him as a soldier, as a leader, as a visionary. Now they saw him speaking with the authority of someone who had glimpsed eternity. News began to spread quietly. People said the president was speaking of Jesus in a way they had never heard before. Not the Jesus of missionaries who came with colonial flags, but the Jesus who walked among fishermen and rebels, who fed the hungry, who defied tyrants. Villagers began to speak his words in markets. Students whispered them in dormitories. Even soldiers repeated them around campfires. It was not a religion being born, but a revolution of the soul. Foreign diplomats noticed a shift. Some worried that a religious movement was taking root in Burkina Faso, one that could destabilize the careful balance of power. But they misunderstood. What was happening was deeper than religion. It was truth awakening hearts, and truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. Charlie Kirk watched from afar as reports reached him. He had not come to plant a new ideology. He had simply shared what he believed was eternal truth. But now he saw that truth catching fire in a land hungry for liberation. And Ibrahim Traoré, walking the corridors of power, no longer felt the loneliness of leadership. He felt instead the companionship of a voice that whispered in his heart, the same voice that had spoken on Galilean hillsides 2,000 years ago. Fear not. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. It was then that Traoré understood the true concept of Christianity was not about belonging to an institution, but about belonging to a kingdom not built by men. And in that realization, he found the strength to lead not only as a soldier, but as a servant of truth.